Good day, everybody, and welcome to another edition of the Military and Foreign Affairs Network. I am your host, the voice of reason. Today we are continuing our ongoing coverage of the war between the Russian Federation and Ukraine. And today we're going to look at 2 points of offensive operations. First, we're going to look at an area where the Ukrainians are attempting to achieve a quote-unquote breakthrough. And what I want to read is a headline from Medusa. It stipulates and states, Ukraine's breakthrough at Uruzhain pushes Russian positions further towards Mariupol. Is that accurate? Have the Ukrainians achieved a breakthrough near the small settlement of Uruzhain? And the answer to that question is no. Is beyond a shadow of a doubt, no. And I'll try to explain. Now, have the Ukrainians made progress in this area? Do they operate on grounds that were once controlled by Russian forces? They do. How much land is that? Well, let's look. 3.4 kilometers in this area near Staromayorsky and Uruzhain. Now, what would make this a breakthrough? If Ukrainian forces continue south and they create this narrow salient all the way down to the main Russian defensive belt. Because you got to understand, they have not achieved a breakthrough on the main Russian defensive line. They are pressuring the line of contact. They are narrowly moving the line of contact south along a front that is essentially, and let's look at this, about 5.2 kilometers. Along a battlefront, along an area of operations running from Zaporizhia east of Volhodar, and let's look at this. That is 151 kilometers in length, obviously as a bird flies. So as the Ukrainians continue to drive south and create this very narrow corridor that's essentially 5 kilometers in width, and let's just say that they do end up getting about halfway to the main Russian defensive line. Another 6.9 kilometers, which still does not get to the main Russian defensive belt. So at that locale there, they are still 4 kilometers from the main Russian defensive belt. I hope that makes sense. Now, the problem with this is the Ukrainians are going to put themselves in a position where if they have not broken through this main defensive barrier, this main defensive line, these Russian forces on their flanks are going to eventually counterattack, and the Ukrainians are simply not going to be able to hold this area, the salient that they are going to create. You are going to have to see some sort of wide frontal attack, or you will have to see the Ukrainians move south, break the Russian main line of defense, and then pivot forces to then attack the main Russian defensive belt. It would be from a east to west direction, while at the same time possibly moving from west to east along this route as well. It's a very difficult situation. It would be more ideal for the Ukrainians if we were seeing broad frontal actions in the entire front being pushed, but we're not. We're seeing these salients being created by the Ukrainians, which are inherently going to put them in a very difficult position, not just because of Russian forces, And again, these Russian ground forces, but Russian aircraft as well. Because again, these forces are not digging in. These forces are attempting to move over ground, over relatively flat surface. If we try to look at the actual topographical satellite image, and is it going to let us do it? Probably not. That's the bad thing with this map, is sometimes you win, sometimes you don't. But this area is essentially just open fields. In a very, very difficult position if you create this long salient in which your forces can't dig in which there's no cover, there's no concealment. It's going to be a very difficult proposition for the Ukrainians. Now you have to ask the question, is the Russians allowing the Ukrainians to do this? Are they operating with a bend but don't break defense? Are they pulling the Ukrainians in to then attack them with artillery, maneuver units on the ground, and ultimately drones and aircraft as well? If we look at the Russian units in this area, it's fairly significant. 71st Guards Motorized Rifle Regiment, 60th Motorized Rifle Brigade on the flanks, 5th Separate Tank Brigade, that unit's operating in this area. So again, a very large force construct of Russian forces operating in this area. So I get the Ukrainians, at least on the mainstream narrative, when you hear about the Ukrainians seizing control of Yerzhine, that when individuals hear that on the mainstream media news, they believe the Ukrainians have achieved some sort of breakthrough. And the reality is that's just simply not the case. They've not achieved a breakthrough. They've not even reached the main Russian defensive belt. Hasn't happened. Now down here in the south of Orkiv, the Ukrainians have made some success, and they have reached the outer belts of the Russian defensive line. But as you can see here, especially south of Orkiv, you have multiple defensive belts. 1, 2, 3, 4, in some cases 5 layers of Russian defensive positions. Now in the north, we are seeing a Russian offensive take place, and this is in the area to the northeast of Kupiansk. Now, if we look at the Russian width of attack, it's much longer. So they are operating along a 16.9 kilometer frontal zone that is pressing south towards Kupiansk. So almost quadruple, the width of the main Russian axis of advance. And the Russians are also attacking in this sector as well, towards the south. And again, this is essentially, again, if we try to measure this, 31 kilometers. So it appears that this operation in the north is a more realistic offensive operations being launched by the Russians. It appears to be an operation designed to seize and take control of large areas of territory. We also know that the Russian force construct, in excess of 100,000 Russian troops operating in this area, is much larger than the multiple brigade set that the Ukrainians are utilizing in this very narrow breakthrough near Yerzhine. So it's a tale of two offensive operations. One looks, at least the Russian offensive operation in the north appears to be designed to seize and take territory, in large amounts of territory. The Ukrainian offensive in the south appears to be designed to create false narratives. And I know that's difficult for the Ukrainian side to hear, and I know it's difficult, and I get it. But at the end of the day, it is going to be very difficult for this offensive operation by the Ukrainians to achieve a successful breakthrough, to achieve military goals, military objectives. And especially when you're talking about what I just referenced in this Medusa claim. Again, Ukraine's breakthrough at Uruzhan pushes Russian positions further towards Mariupol. Is it? I mean, we are really making a stretch claim here. Mariupol is down here. What are they saying? What are they trying to say? I mean, I get that the journalists working for these media organizations aren't schooled in the operational art. But they are taking statements from the Ukrainian side. Do the Ukrainians believe that this operation near Staromayorsky and Uruzhan is going to achieve a breakthrough that is going to allow a Ukrainian move on Mariupol? I mean, there is a lot more that has to be done in this sector before you even start talking about a move on Mariupol. Don't count your chickens before they hatch. Seriously. And then again, this is the only real area of success where we're seeing one, maybe two. Let's look at how many Ukrainian brigades are operating in this area. I completely lost my, here we go. So Ukrainian brigades active in the Uruzhan sector. Okay, and we're going to kind of look at, essentially you have about 3 Ukrainian brigades, at least portrayed on this map here. What is this? 31st Mechanized Brigade. You got Marine units, 35th Marine Brigade. You have Special Operations, 3rd Regiment Special Purpose Forces, and then the 68th Yager Brigade. So you have no heavy units operating in this area with the exception of this here on the right Ukrainian flank, which is the 31st Mechanized Brigade. And then way over here on the Ukrainians, it would be the Ukrainians' left flank, would be elements of the 4th Tank Brigade. But doing most of the fighting are elements of the Yager, 68th Yager, 35th Marines, and 3rd Regiment of the Special Purpose Forces that are operating. And then backing them up, you have the 129th Territorial Defense Brigade, and then you have the 128th Territorial Defense Brigade as well. And I don't, if you look up here to the north, where the Russians are conducting operations, at least this map doesn't give you a lot of information on what the Russians are using. We know it's more than one brigade. It's a multi-divisional set of forces that the Russians are using east and north of Kupiansk. And that's what's happening. And so what we'll do is we'll go back to the actual deep state map. But again, very, very difficult situation, and I don't believe at this point the media is understanding what they're saying or really can comprehend what's happening on the ground. Because again, the Ukrainian military is preventing any real media outlet from going to the front line. On top of that, many mainstream media, poll reporters, even contracted reporters, are adverse to operate close to the front line, given the high lethality of this area. I mean, you really risk dying if you go into this area. So being able to ascertain what's actually happening and getting real, valid information is difficult. But at this point, we don't see this quote-unquote breakthrough that is happening. Now, obviously, if this changes and the situation continues to develop further, we would reassess. But right now, we're just simply not seeing this Ukrainian breakthrough, especially a breakthrough that tries to articulate a move all the way to Mariupol. That's just completely unrealistic at this point. So we'll continue to monitor. We will continue to report. Thank you for joining us. More to come. And as always, have a good day.